Political witchcraft in Washington, D.C. Welcome to SkyWatch TV for Monday, November 7th, 2016. I'm Derek Gilbert. This is a special broadcast, one we hadn't planned to do today, but based on new information that came up Friday and then further revelations over the weekend, we felt it was necessary to change the schedule we had for ourselves and to bring this to you today. On Friday, Wikileaks released a new batch of email from the account of Hillary Clinton's campaign chair, John Podesta. Among the email was one from his brother, Tony Podesta, who is a Washington, D.C. lobbyist. Tony and his wife, Heather, very well connected in the Washington political scene. They often host fundraising parties for prominent Democratic politicians. And Tony Podesta himself was a campaign chair for Bill Clinton, ran his Pennsylvania campaign back in '96, also worked for John Kerry in his presidential run. The email was an invitation from a 69-year-old Serbian performance artist by the name of Marina Abramovic, inviting Tony and his wife to a something she called spirit cooking dinner at her place. And Tony had forwarded the email to John Podesta, asking if he and his wife would be able to attend. Well, sharp-eyed investigators began looking into Marina Abramovic and what the spirit cooking dinner was all about, what spirit cooking was about. Turned up a very disturbing YouTube video, a piece of so-called performance art that I will not share with you here. We'll just show you one image. This is a still from that so-called performance. Cut deeply into the middle finger of your left hand and eat the pain. Some of the ingredients in this so-called spirit cooking recipes involved bodily fluids, and frankly, the ingredients are right out of the recipe, the cookbook of Aleister Crowley, if you will, for the cakes of light that were part of his Gnostic Mass 100 years ago. Well, this generated a bit of firestorm of shock on social media outlets over the weekend. Conservatives, Christian conservatives especially, stunned that this kind of thing was going on at high levels within Washington, D.C. It really shouldn't surprise us. This really affects both parties. But it brought to mind an interview that friend of SkyWatch TV, Lieutenant Colonel Bob Maginnis, gave on the Jim Baker Show back in September, in which he said that he was personally aware of occult practices at the highest levels of the American government. And of course, he was mocked for that, not just by liberals and progressives, but by conservatives as well. And a number of conservative commentators also, over the latest release of John Podesta emails, was saying, look, there's nothing to see here. Well, wanting to hear directly from Colonel Maginnis, we got in touch with him over the weekend. He was very gracious to give us some of his time. Colonel Maginnis, thank you for joining us today. Back in September, you were a guest on the Jim Baker program, and you made some comments about the influence of the unseen realm on those in power in Washington, D.C. that attracted some attention from progressives. For people who didn't see that program, what was it you said, and what was the reaction like from the left?
Well, in decades that I've been in Washington, all the way back to the early 70s, I've had the occasion, maybe the misfortune, some would say, of meeting people that self-identified themselves as witches. And they said, well, we're really surprised that you even talked to us, because they saw evidently the spirit that resides within me. At the same time, it's interesting to note that when my mother worked in Washington and I was at West Point, my mother was the personal assistant to Gene Dixon, who was the well-known 20th century psychic and one who visited the White House many, many times. So I've seen the dark side of Washington, and because of my work at the Family Research Council over a decade and the last 14 years I've been back in the Pentagon, I've seen firsthand evidence of evil influence. And so when this latest story about John Podesta came across my attention, I said, that just fits Washington, because after I said that on the Jim Baker Show back in September, I was, soundly criticized because I was saying there's evil in Washington. Duh. Now, of course there's evil in Washington. Washington is filled with evil influences. The evil empire is alive and well there and does a lot of work in the White House, on Congress, and the courts, etc. So, criticism goes when you speak in public. I spoke in public. I declared what I had personally experienced. People may object to that, but that's, that being the case, I'm going to continue to do that. Now, when this WikiLeaks thing came out the other day about John Podesta, the campaign chair, I think, for Hillary Clinton, a lot of people were just struck, because what it said is that John Podesta's brother, who is in business with him in their lobbying firm, which is an interesting organization, was apparently invited to a party there in Washington by Marina Abramovich, I think it is. She's from the Balkans. She's a woman that probably close to 70, an author, but she has a very rich background that just set off alarms. Apparently the email invited Tony, and by association also mentioned John Podesta, to her party at her home. And it was referred to as spirit cooking dinner. So that set off alarm bells for a lot of people. Now, we know that in 1996 that there was a book published that she contributed to, Marina contributed to, called Cookbook. And it featured some of her, you would roughly say, artwork. And it, she said she kind of clarified it as being aphrodisiac recipes that were supposed to provoke thought. To me, it's modern art. Of course, she is known since 1970 as sort of the godmother of performing art. And she does some absolutely weird things. But what really caught my attention is just a couple days ago, the New York Times reviewed her latest book, which is Walk Through Walls. Walk Through Walls. And in that book, what Maria talks about herself is just mind-blowing. She claims to be clairvoyant. She claims to have association, or maybe deals with, which it wouldn't surprise me given her background, with tarot cards. She says that she's fascinated with spirituality and machoism. There's a quote in the book that says, "I take off my clothes and cut myself," end quote. That in itself is bizarre. Yes. She sees herself as a mystic, someone who practices mysticism, which, as far as I'm concerned, is occultism. And then, of course, she claims to predict the future, which, of course, certainly reminds me of the association that I had with Jean Dixon and her entree into the White House and power centers in Washington. She supposedly predicted earthquakes in Italy and the attempted assassination of Pope John Paul II. Right. So she has done some very bizarre things. She clearly is in a spiritual realm that's not one that I feel comfortable with. And so she's hosting a party, evidently $10,000 a head for those that contributed, I believe it was, to the Hillary Clinton campaign. So they came to her personal residence. Now, she claims that she never, they weren't drinking blood and doing this sort of thing at her party, that it was a regular menu, and that, things have been blown out of proportion. Well, it's my argument that we are known by the people with whom we associate. Here we have someone who claims to be clairvoyant, who claims to be a mystic, who claims to take off her clothes and cut herself. And this is the person that the chairman of Hillary Clinton's campaign is associated with via his brother, Tony. Now, understand who John and Tony are. John Podesta worked as the chief of staff in Bill Clinton's White House during the time in which Monica Lewinsky's scandal was all in the news. Subsequently, Tony and John established a lobbying organization in Washington. Now, who do you think might be their clients? Well, a client that they brought aboard in 2015 was the Saudi Arabian government, of which they receive $140,000 a month for their services. And recently, the Russian government and another enterprise that John Podesta is involved in received a $35 million investment in that company. So is it because they're really good, or is it because of their associations, kind of the pay for play or play for pay venue? Now, keep in mind that after John left government with Bill Clinton, he established not only this lobbying firm and some other enterprises, but also the Center for American Progress. Center for American Progress is the most influential liberal think tank in Washington. It doesn't declare who its donors are. And in fact, one of its donors is George Soros, who has met with Podesta, talked about immigration, talked about a host of other issues. They also have, interestingly, when Hillary Clinton under Obama was the Secretary of State, John Podesta was appointed to an advisory board on foreign policy. No doubt he was providing advice during that period of time. He came into the Obama administration in the midterm after Obama lost the House and the Senate. And he started to do all sorts of reparative therapy, I suppose, that suited Mr. Obama. Then, interestingly, after Hillary left and started to run for the presidency, it's John Podesta's lawyer, Peter Kasich, who understandably, an influential man who happens to be the current Assistant Attorney General of the United States, is reported to have told Podesta, who was the campaign chairman for Hillary Clinton, that in fact, there was an email investigation going on.
They were tipped off by Kasich.
She was using an illegal server. Right. Now, having said all that, John Podesta continues to get a stipend, even though he's left the campaign, from the Hillary Clinton campaign. He gets a stipend, and these are multiple thousands of dollars from Hillary Clinton supporters. So he's getting a lot of money on the side. He's obviously, if Clinton is elected, is in a prime position to become a very senior person in a future administration. A man that clearly is, that this Marina lady calls Tony, his brother, my dear friend. And she signs off her letters, all my love, in the email that was released. These issues are of some consequence. Clearly, these people have a lot of influence over the Clintons. They will in the future if Hillary Clinton is elected. And so my original argument made back in September in the Jim Baker show was that, senior officials in our government are evil. They're influenced by demonic forces. And I think that this is just more evidence of that allegation. And so I stand by it.
I would agree with you. I've watched the video of Abramovich's spirit cooking. It's about a 10-minute YouTube video, and we're not going to link to it because it's really disturbing. If viewers want to look it up for themselves, they can. But it is disturbing. Just be prayed up when you watch it because it is stomach twisting. And the so-called ingredients in this recipe are straight out of the cookbook of Aleister Crowley. It's the same sort of stuff that he would include in the elements that they concocted for his Gnostic Mass. It is revolting. The thing that surprised me, and maybe it's because I'm a little yet naive, the closest I've gotten to Washington, D.C. is Philadelphia. and that was close enough for my taste. There was some reaction, some pushback to the reaction of people like you and me to the WikiLeaks disclosure of the Abramovich email to Tony Podesta, saying, "Look," and in the words of one young commentator who appears on Fox News fairly regularly, "The world just needs to," and I'll quote her now, "calm the hell down," because she thought there's nothing here. This is just performance art. You may not like it, but it's there's nothing to this. It's just one person's idiosyncrasies. Just quit talking about demons and devils and things like that. Were you surprised at all to see conservative or so-called conservatives responding that way?
Well, I've been in Washington for decades. I've been personally attacked and threatened. When you declare the truth through Christ, in Christ's name, you're going to be attacked. And these may, in fact, be, as I've said in recent, certainly interviews and in my books, the end times, because the persecution against Christians is going up. And the world, for the most part, is incredibly naive, especially those that are spiritually dead, about the spirit world. They have no idea that there's a spiritual war going on in our very midst. And Washington, D.C. is an epicenter of that spiritual conflict. So some young woman who happens to be incredibly earthly bright, but incredibly stupid when it comes to spiritual issues, is going to use her platform to criticize those of us who have many decades working around the world, and especially here in Washington, and have experienced what we speak of firsthand. So I'm not surprised that there's criticism. I'll be criticized for this very interview if, in fact, others see it. But I believe strongly in what I personally have experienced. You can't take that away from me. You can't take away my experience through my mother here in Washington many, many decades ago, and in the White House. She worked in the White House. I've seen these things. And so what I experience today when I see the John Podesta thing, I've worked with lobbyists for many years in Washington. I know how evil they can be. And so, for people to be critical, I expect that. I'm not looking for a reward here. I recognize where I'm going. And so I'm going to declare the truth as long as I can.
Amen, brother. Well, Colonel Maginnis, we pray for you and for your work. It is a blessing and so much needed that a believer in Jesus Christ and in the true and inerrant word that we have between the covers of our Bibles is still walking the halls of power in Washington, D.C., and especially inside the Pentagon. So we do appreciate you. Appreciate your time this weekend, and we'll see what direction the country is going to go after Tuesday. The Lord is in control, however it breaks, but we'll see what lies ahead. Certainly not an easy road.
Well, thank you very much, Derek. It's a pleasure.
Colonel Bob Maginnis is the author of the new book, Future War, from Defender Publishing. We'll tell you how you can get a copy at with a very special package in just a moment. By the way, I should point out that over the weekend we became aware of a problem with our Roku channel, and that the interview with Colonel Maginnis that was broadcast, the program featuring Colonel Maginnis that was broadcast on our network television outlets, was not displaying properly on our Roku channel. There's a web exclusive interview that many watched. It's been one of our most popular programs over the last month. But if you haven't seen the program that was broadcast on our network television affiliates, that has been fixed, and it is available now at the SkyWatchTV channel on Roku. Coming up, when is art not art, but a window into the state of someone's soul? That's next on SkyWatchTV. The technology that's changing the modern military is changing the very definition of what it means to be human. SkyWatchTV is proud to offer the important new book from Lieutenant Colonel Bob Maginnis, Future War: Super Soldiers, Terminators, Cyberspace, and the National Security Strategy for 21st Century Combat. Order Future War from the SkyWatchTV store, and you'll also get Never Submit by Lieutenant Colonel Bob Maginnis, the Blood on the Altar audio presentation, The Coming War Between Christian versus Christian, featuring Tom Horn and Steve Quayle. What You Don't Know Will Kill You: Genetics, GMOs, and the Plan to Eradicate Humankind, a special investigative report from Tom Horn and the SkyWatchTV team. And a 2-year subscription to SkyWatchTV magazine. This is a value of more than $125, yours for just $24.95. Order now by calling toll-free 844-750-4985 or log on to skywatchtvstore.com. This week on Skywatch TV, Gary Haven tells us about a national security issue Congress is aware of that could kill 90% of us within a year, and yet they've done nothing about it. It's called an electromagnetic pulse. Gary Haven is the writer, producer of the film Amerigeddon, which is now available on DVD and Blu-ray. He is our guest on Skywatch TV, which airs this week. A number of locations. You'll see it on the crawl at the bottom of the screen. But there's also a web-exclusive interview, one that will not be broadcast on network TV, and you can only see that as a web-exclusive from Skywatch TV at skywatchtv.com and the Skywatch TV channels on Roku and on YouTube. Now, over the weekend, there were some additional pieces of information that came out about John and Tony Podesta. A couple of pieces that were written about them, profile pieces by mainstream news publications that shed some insight, in my view, on the state of mind, if not the state of the very souls of the Podesta brothers. The Washington Post, back in 2010, ran a profile piece on Tony and Heather Podesta, focusing on the artwork in their home in Washington, D.C., which is the subject of much conversation when guests arrive. Why? Well, in part because of this sculpture hanging over the main entryway, a headless person bent back into an unnatural position. The piece of art, well, it appears to be based on the post-death pose imposed by cannibal killer Jeffrey Dahmer on one of his victims. I'm not going to show you that photo. The Podestas met in 2001, and according to the Washington Post article, when they met, Tony commented to Heather, and remember, this is their first date, quote, "I don't know why it is, but I have artworks where the women have no heads," end quote. Now, it's my opinion that the art that we appreciate sheds a little insight into our psychology and perhaps the state of the spirit within us. You know the kind of art we have in our house? Flowers, landscapes. One that was a gift from a friend showing my late father and Sharon's late father fishing in a pond together in front of a building that looks like the church in which we got married. That's the kind of art we have at our house. Not that I'm holding us up as paragons of virtue. I know the thoughts that go through my own head, and I also know that there is none righteous, no, not one. But in addition to this particular piece of art and the headless women that Tony Podesta seems to fancy, there is an 8-foot-tall naked man photographed in the living room in his Washington, D.C. home. And this 8-foot naked man represents, it's an update of a 15th century portrait of the dead Jesus, except that whereas the painting was modest and showed a robe, crossed the private areas of the model, the photo shows everything. 8-foot photo, naked, dead Jesus in his living room. And the art that I found personally the most disturbing is a collection of color photos in the Podesta's bedroom by a photographer who is known for her documentary-style pictures of nude teenagers taken in their parents' homes. I repeat, hanging in the Podesta's bedroom. Remember, these people are politically connected at the highest levels of the American government. Another story that came out, and that was published in the Washington Post in 2010 as a puff piece. The unique art tastes of Heather and Tony Podesta. Well, a piece of art that Tony shared with John Podesta, again, Hillary Clinton's campaign chair, is now hanging on the wall of his campaign office in Brooklyn. It is a painting showing a man in a suit lying on a table. Over the man stand two other men, both with plates, knives, and forks, about ready to dig in. This is a scene that depicts cannibalism. And in the Time article, in fact, this is in the opening paragraph. This is the lead for the Time article. John Podesta is quoted as saying, "It's better to be the guy with the fork than the guy on the table," end quote. Again, not just displaying it, but not really even thinking that it's a thing. Another article that came out over the weekend, which was a piece from a couple of years ago, how Washington's elites plan to spend their summer vacation, and quoted John Podesta as saying, "I plan to sit in my condo in location in California, 50 feet from where the Donner Party ate each other." Look, there's something wrong here. And the conservative commentators, there was a young woman who writes for the so-called conservative website, townhall.com, who literally told people like me and Colonel Maginnis, who are raising this issue, to literally, and I quote, "calm the hell down." There are a couple possibilities here. Either the young lady and others like her believe that the spirit realm doesn't exist, in which case they're on the wrong side of history. The eyewitness testimony of Jesus' resurrection is better recorded, better attested than just about anything else from the ancient world. If we throw out the evidence for the literal bodily resurrection of Jesus, we have to throw out everything we know about the ancient world if we apply the same rules of evidence. Secondly, is that she's just uninformed, and that's possible. In which case, I suggest that the young lady, I'm not going to name her because this is not a personal thing, but I suggest she rectify that gap in her education in a hurry, because it's not like picking the wrong winner in a Sunday football game or guessing wrong at the numbers on the pick six. It's a question that has eternal consequences. The third possibility, of course, is that she and others like her who are dismissing this whole issue over the spirit cooking and the creepy art is that they are aware of what's at stake and what's going on here, and they're trying to keep the rest of us blind. Remember, we wrestle not against flesh and blood, but against principalities and powers and rulers of spiritual darkness. And if the evidence that we've seen since Friday about those connected to the Hillary Clinton campaign, the Democratic National Committee, and I will add, not just the Democrats. If you're not aware of this bit of history, go online and do a little research into the Franklin Credit Union cover-up, Omaha, Nebraska, Lawrence King. This is the highest levels of American politics. Now, one of the candidates has promised tomorrow that if elected, he will drain the swamp. Will he? We have no way to know. The other major party candidate is embedded in this political elite like a tick on a dog. As Christians, we know that we are citizens of another realm, a higher kingdom, a kingdom that is not of this earth. We know that our job is to make disciples of all nations and that we can spread the gospel regardless of who wins the election tomorrow. So let's not be too caught up in the results of this election. But as citizens who are called to give unto Caesar, to render unto Caesar what is Caesar's, voting is a responsibility. Think carefully, pray, cast your vote tomorrow. Until then, we thank you for watching as we keep watch. I'm Derek Gilbert, and this is SkyWatch TV.